The town nestled quietly between verdant mountains and thick forests, small enough for everyone to know each other by name and peaceful enough that children roamed open fields freely until the sunset bathed the sky in shades of orange and purple. Life here moved gently, shaped only by the shifting seasons and occasional festivities honoring local traditions. Nature thrived richly around this tranquil haven, where towering pine trees stood watchfully over the serene town below. It was a place untouched by the restless chaos of the outside world, where the air felt pure and kindness bloomed as naturally as wildflowers in spring. At the heart of this idyllic community lived a man deeply respected by all, known simply as Torin to his neighbors. To many, he was affectionately dubbed the Elder, by those who'd heard tales of him that stretched far beyond the town's borders. Torin had served courageously overseas long ago, though he never boasted of his exploits or the honors he'd earned, choosing humility over acclaim. He lived simply in a modest cabin at the forest's edge, far from clamor and crowds. Despite his storied past, Torin sought quiet solitude over recognition, his presence always calm and reassuring. His days were filled with small acts of kindness. He'd silently assist elderly neighbors with tasks they could no longer manage or warmly welcome newcomers to ease their transition. Children eagerly awaited his visits, for Torin's pockets were often stuffed with treats or curious trinkets, sparking joy on their faces. To many townsfolk, he embodied the warmth and compassion that bound their community together. Whether someone faced hardship or celebrated triumph, Torin was there, a steadfast guardian whose wisdom and generosity seemed boundless. Yet Torin's deepest passion lay beyond human bonds. He held a profound love for wildlife and nature, spending countless hours wandering peacefully among trees and streams, marveling at the beauty around him. His connection with animals was extraordinary. Deer approached him fearlessly, birds perched comfortably on his shoulder, and squirrels gathered playfully at his feet. Townspeople often teased fondly that animals trusted Torin more than their own instincts, as if he spoke a secret language with them, a gentle bond forged through mutual respect and quiet admiration. Among all the creatures he met, one stood out. An orphaned bear cub he'd found abandoned deep in the forest years ago. The helpless cub was frail, terrified, and near death when Torin discovered it trembling in the cold rain beneath a mighty oak. Compassion surged within him as he wrapped the shivering creature in his warm coat, carrying it tenderly back to his cabin without a thought for his own safety. Torin devoted himself wholly to nursing the tiny cub back to health. Days stretched into weeks, and weeks into months, as he patiently fed and cared for it, coaxing strength back into its fragile frame. Their bond deepened daily, a relationship rooted in trust and tenderness. The cub soon recognized Torin's scent and presence, growing at ease in his care, showing affection with gentle nudges and quiet moments shared under the moonlit sky. Yet Torin knew the bear belonged to the wild. When it was strong enough, he carefully prepared it for release into its natural home, understanding that their parting, though inevitable, was right. On the day he set the cub free, a quiet sadness filled Torin's eyes, but pride swelled in his heart. He'd given this vulnerable creature a second chance. Even after its return to the wilderness, Torin often glimpsed it from afar, growing larger and stronger with each season. The bear would occasionally linger near his cabin, silently watching before vanishing into the woods, as if it remembered the kindness that saved it, preserving an unspoken tie despite their separate worlds. These sightings warmed Torin's heart, assuring him the bear thrived freely as intended, never forgetting the care that shaped its fate. As time passed, Torin continued his peaceful, meaningful life, cherished by all who knew him. Though age slowed his steps, the warmth in his eyes and his gentle smile never dimmed, comforting those around him. Unaware of how deeply he'd touched both people and animals, Torin embodied selflessness, oblivious that soon the town would unite, not to celebrate his quiet existence, but to mourn a devastating loss they never foresaw. The tranquil town he loved would soon face an unimaginable tragedy, leaving an unfillable void and setting the stage for unforeseen events. News of Torin's sudden passing swept through the small town, casting a heavy silence over its usually lively streets. It happened without warning, quietly in his sleep, leaving everyone stunned and heartbroken. No one had imagined losing Torin so abruptly. His steady strength and constant presence had been something they'd all taken for granted. People wandered in disbelief, unable to accept that such a comforting figure was gone forever. The weight of loss permeated every corner, binding them in shared grief. Friends and neighbors gathered at Torin's cabin upon hearing the news, their hearts heavy, eyes wide with shock. The cabin, once alive with his warmth, now felt cold and strangely hollow. They stood in small, silent groups, softly recounting cherished memories of their beloved friend. Each held a personal tale of Torin, a time he'd offered quiet solace in hardship or lent strength without seeking reward. They spoke of his subtle generosity, the countless small acts that left lasting marks on their lives. The town resolved to honor Torin's memory with a funeral reflecting his humble yet remarkable life. A beautiful meadow near the forest's edge, where Torin often strolled, was chosen as the site. Preparations were meticulous, each detail thoughtfully selected to echo his spirit. Fresh wildflowers from nearby fields adorned the setting, and wooden chairs were arranged in gentle rows, fostering an air of quiet respect and reverence. As the community readied for Torin's farewell, a soft sorrow filled the air. Tears fell silently among friends struggling to grasp the emptiness left behind. Conversations brimmed with fond memories. Torin's kindness, his love for animals, the times he'd quietly bolstered someone in need without expecting thanks. Though Torin had shunned attention in life, the community now sought to ensure his goodness endured. Despite the grief cloaking the town, there was a shared resolve to celebrate his life. People prepared heartfelt tributes, arranged flowers, and organized every detail with a reverence reserved for someone truly cherished, aiming to capture Torin's gentle essence and quiet heroism. A man who never craved praise. As the funeral neared, an unusual stillness settled over the town. Nature itself seemed to mourn. The typically cheerful birds hushed, and the wind whispered faintly through the pines, as if grieving too. Torin's bond with the natural world grew even clearer, as if it felt the loss of one of its truest allies. On the funeral morning, townsfolk arrived at the meadow early, their faces solemn yet determined. Each carried gratitude for having known Torin, whose life had shaped their own. Chairs faced a simple wooden casket resting under soft sunlight, adorned with flowers from nearby gardens and the surrounding woods, a scene both comforting and heartrending. Quiet murmurs and gentle sobs filled the air as people settled in, lost in private reflections of Torin's life. Children gripped their parents' hands, sensing the depth of loss even if they didn't fully understand. Older residents exchanged silent nods, united in sorrow for a friend who'd cared so genuinely. Despite the sadness, the town's intent to celebrate Torin was firm. They knew this wouldn't be an ordinary ceremony. Torin had been far from ordinary. They wanted it to embody the warmth, compassion, and deep connection to nature he'd lived every day. No one could have foreseen that this heartfelt farewell would soon be interrupted by an unexpected visitor, turning a day of quiet mourning into something unforgettable. On the funeral day, gentle sunlight filtered through the trees, bathing the meadow in warm golden hues. A soft breeze stirred the leaves, carrying the faint scent of blooming wildflowers. Mourners gathered, filling every seat as more arrived, settling in with solemn reverence. The air brimmed with heartfelt sorrow yet radiated immense respect for the gentle elder they'd lost. Emotions rippled silently through the crowd, hearts united by gratitude and loss. An elderly man, Kale, who'd known Torin since their youth, stepped forward to begin the ceremony. With deep sincerity, he shared stories painting Torin's generous spirit and humble nature, each memory told with quiet admiration, striking a chord among the mourners. As he spoke, quiet tears welled in many eyes. Every heart felt Torin's absence, realizing the profound impact his subtle presence had made. The crowd listened, recalling Torin's routine kindnesses, delivering groceries to a widow confined to her home, repairing a farmer's fences after storms without accepting payment, consoling the grieving with gentle grace. These tales revealed Torin's quiet heroism, hidden beneath layers of humility. The stories flowed, crafting a portrait of a man whose greatness lay in subtle acts of love and compassion. Tears glistened as memories filled the meadow, each anecdote unveiling Torin's humanity. Yet even in grief, there was comfort in recalling the extraordinary kindness that marked his ordinary days. Mourners exchanged gentle nods and silent glances, united in gratitude for knowing such a compassionate man. As Kale concluded, silence returned, wrapping the crowd in a comforting embrace. Soft breezes brushed the leaves, and birdsong faintly resumed, tender and delicate, as if nature offered its condolences. No one spoke, letting quiet reflection fill the air, each heart honoring Torin's enduring kindness and warmth. Yet just as they braced for the final goodbye, a sudden rustling from the wood's edge shattered the stillness. Whispers of condolence halted, replaced by curiosity and confusion. Eyes turned sharply toward the sound, hearts quickening as anticipation overtook sorrow. Slowly, from the dense forest, a dark, imposing figure emerged into the clearing. Shock swept through the crowd as they spotted a large bear stepping cautiously from the trees. Its presence, unexpected and startling, brought immediate tension. Instinctive fear rippled through the group, uncertainty clouding their thoughts. Yet the bear appeared neither aggressive nor agitated. It paused at the forest's edge, lifting its head as if surveying the gathering, its eyes reflecting a strange gentleness that eased the initial alarm. The bear stood still, patiently observing the scene, and no one moved, no one spoke, the tension thick and unbroken as they awaited its next move. In those silent moments, something inexplicable stirred within the mourners, a cautious anticipation hinting at something extraordinary. Little did they know, this bear's arrival wasn't random. It shared a powerful bond with the man they honored, and its next actions would forever reshape how they remembered Torin and grasped the depth of his gentle heart. The bear stood at the forest's edge, its massive frame casting a shadow over the meadow. The mourners remained frozen, breath caught between fear and awe. Bears rarely ventured so near people, especially during a gathering, yet this one moved with none of the wild unpredictability they expected. It didn't charge or seem lost. Instead, it took slow, deliberate steps toward the casket, its movements eerily calm, as if it knew its destination. A ripple of unease spread as the bear advanced. Some stepped back, clutching loved ones, unsure of what would unfold. Others stayed still, watching in quiet shock, sensing something beyond comprehension. Kale, who'd just spoken, stared with wide eyes, hands trembling on the podium. The bear's presence felt almost otherworldly, drawn by an unseen force of deep, unspoken loyalty. It paused a few feet from the casket, its dark, knowing eyes flickering with something unfamiliar in a wild animal. Not hunger, not fear, but something profoundly human. The bear exhaled deeply, a heavy sigh echoing in the silence, then stepped closer. The moment stretched endlessly as every eye locked onto the creature, hearts pounding with uncertainty. Then, to everyone's astonishment, the bear gently lifted its front paws and placed them on the wooden casket. A collective gasp rose, but no one moved. There was no malice in its actions, no violence, only a soft lowering of its head, pressing its muzzle against the casket's surface, as if recognizing who lay within. The bear remained still, its breathing slow and heavy, its large form strangely delicate in its grief. Tears welled in several mourners' eyes as they watched this unbelievable scene. The elder, loved by humans and animals alike for his quiet kindness, was being honored by a creature of the wild, as if it too had come to say goodbye. It lingered for several moments, its immense frame towering over the casket, radiating sorrow in a way that pierced even the hardest hearts. The wind stirred softly, rustling the leaves in a whispering hush, as if the forest mourned alongside them. The bear let out a deep, guttural sound, a mournful groan that sent shivers through the crowd. Not a growl, but a cry of grief transcending species, a universal loss needing no words. Mourners wiped their eyes, overwhelmed by the raw emotion in the bear's actions. Some who doubted Torin's bond with nature now understood. His kindness reached further than they'd imagined. This wasn't coincidence. It was tribute. The bear hadn't come by chance, it remembered. Whispers moved through the crowd. A child asked softly if the bear was crying. His mother tightening her grip, unable to answer, watching with tearful eyes. The scene was deeply moving, inexplicable, unforgettable. The bear stayed, its heavy breathing the only sound, time standing still as it paid silent respects in a way no one had witnessed before. An image etched into their memories forever. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the bear stepped back, lingering as if reluctant to leave. With one last glance at the casket, it turned and took slow steps toward the forest. The mourners watched silently as it vanished into the trees, swallowed by the wilderness Torin had loved. No one spoke for long moments after, the air thick with emotion, the moment's weight pressing on their chests. The bear's appearance wasn't a disruption. It was a farewell, a final goodbye from a creature that had known Torin's love and care. What had happened defied explanation, transcending understanding. It was sacred. A heavy silence settled over the meadow, lingering after the bear's departure. The mourners stood still, hearts gripped by what they'd witnessed. The air, once heavy with sorrow, now carried something unspoken yet profound. The bear's presence had changed everything, turning an emotional farewell into something sacred. Tears flowed freely, not just from grief, but from the overwhelming realization of what they'd seen. Some wiped their faces in disbelief. Others bowed their heads, lost in emotion. Even hardened older men couldn't suppress the raw feeling welling within. Those who'd known Torin longest, already grieving, felt a shift. It was as if the bear had spoken a language beyond human grasp, yet every soul understood. This wasn't accident or coincidence. It was a farewell from something wild, untamed, yet deeply tied to the man who'd lived devoted to nature. Torin had left a legacy not just among people, but in the wilderness he called home. Kale took a deep breath, his voice thick as he spoke again, trembling with the moment's weight. He spoke of Torin's love for all life, his quiet compassion, how he saw no divide between forest creatures and townsfolk. To Torin, all life was sacred. Now, astonishingly, life itself had come to mourn him. The funeral continued, but everything had shifted. Words carried deeper meaning. Tributes felt more profound. When people shared memories, their voices wavered, filled with newfound appreciation. Torin, a man of few words, had spoken through actions louder than any speech. His kindness hadn't just touched people. It had left an imprint so deep the wilderness grieved him. The casket remained central, surrounded by flowers and love. But now there was an unshakable sense that Torin wasn't truly gone. His spirit lived in the forest, in the trees that had whispered his name, in the animals that found comfort in him. The bear's tribute confirmed what many believed. Torin's soul hadn't faded. It had become part of something greater. As the ceremony's final words were spoken, mourners stood, reluctant to leave. They hugged tighter, hands lingering in silent comfort. Even those who hadn't known Torin felt connected. His story had grown beyond one man, becoming eternal. As the sun dipped, casting golden light across the meadow, people began to depart, walking back to town in quiet reflection. No one rushed or spoke loudly. There was no need. The day had changed them forever. One thought lingered. The bear had come for a reason, not by chance, but because it remembered, because love, however wild, never fades. In that moment, the townsfolk grasped something new. Torin hadn't just loved nature. He was part of it, and nature had loved him back. As the last mourners left, the day's weight settled deep in their hearts. The funeral was unlike any they'd known. Not for the words or flowers, but for the silent visitor who'd said goodbye. The story of the bear's arrival spread fast, reaching even those absent, carried through town with emotion and awe. Some called it a miracle, others proof of something greater. The townsfolk began to see the forest differently. No longer just untamed land, but a sacred place holding Torin's memories. A man who'd cared for it with the tenderness he showed his neighbors. The towering trees, winding rivers, and roaming creatures were all part of his legacy. He hadn't just lived among them, he belonged to them. Days after, many visited the meadow, standing where the bear had rested its head on the casket. Some to pay respects, others to feel closer to Torin. Children who'd once heard his stories gathered, retelling the bear's visit, their eyes wide with wonder. To them, it wasn't just a tale. It was a lesson in kindness and love, showing how even small acts of compassion leave lasting impacts. The bear didn't return, but its presence lingered. Some claimed to see it watching from the tree's edge, guarding where Torin rested. Others heard its footsteps in the woods at night, a quiet reminder that, though Torin was gone, he wasn't forgotten. The bond between man and beast hadn't ended. It had transformed into something eternal. Seasons passed, and life continued. The trees shed leaves, rivers swelled, mountains stood unchanging. Yet the memory of that day never faded, spoken of with reverence. Torin's name lived in conversations, not as a distant memory, but as a presence felt in the land he'd loved. As years went by, new generations grew up hearing of the bear at the funeral, listening with wide eyes as elders recounted how the wilderness mourned a man who sought no recognition yet received the greatest tribute. Some traveled far to stand in the meadow, hoping to feel the love and respect shown that day. The town evolved with time, but one thing remained untouched. At the forest's edge, where the meadow met the trees, a simple wooden sign honored the man who'd walked its paths. It bore no grand words, just his name carved deep, with a single line beneath. He lived with kindness, and the world remembered. Beyond the trees, in the dense shadows, a pair of deep, knowing eyes still watched. The same eyes that had shed silent tears at the funeral of a man who'd meant everything to a world that couldn't speak, yet found its way to say goodbye. Over time, Torin's story with the bear wove into the town's history. Not just a tale for those who knew him, but a legend carrying love, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between man and nature. Parents told their children of the elder who'd saved a helpless cub, and how, years later, that bear returned for a final farewell. The story never dulled, growing richer with each telling, its message as potent as ever. Torin's grave became a place of reflection. People visited not just to remember, but to find comfort in his kindness. On certain days, wildflowers appeared on the marker, placed by unseen hands, always fresh, untouched by wind. Some thought it an admirer's work. Others whispered the forest itself hadn't forgotten. Even years later, some claimed to see a large figure in the trees at dusk. Massive, powerful, yet never threatening. Hunters spoke of feeling watched in the deep woods. Not with malice, but an unspoken presence guarding something precious. Believers in the legend knew the truth. The bear hadn't left. It remained near where its friend rested, silently watching over their shared land. The meadow stayed untouched by time, never built upon. An unspoken pact to keep it sacred, where Torin and the bear's bond was witnessed. On the anniversary of his passing, people gathered there, not to mourn, but to celebrate a life well lived. They shared stories, laughed at memories, and recalled the lesson Torin unknowingly left. Kindness, however small, is never unnoticed. Even in the wildest corners, love endures. His story spread beyond the town. Travelers came, drawn by the tale of an ordinary man whose kindness touched a wild heart. His name was spoken with reverence, as one who understood the world uniquely. He'd lived quietly, humbly, seeking no recognition, yet received something greater than any medal. One evening, years later, as the sun sank below the mountains and the town settled into dusk stillness, a lone figure stood at the forest's edge. The great bear, now older, stronger, wiser, watched the meadow silently. It lingered unmoving, as if lost in thought, then turned with a deep breath, vanishing into the trees, its form blending into the dark. Yet its spirit remained. In the wind's whisper, the leaves rustle, the rivers murmur. Torin was there not in body, but in the land's essence and the hearts of those who remembered. His story would never fade, a timeless reminder that kindness transcends words, species, and life itself, proof that unlikely bonds leave imprints beyond our time. If this incredible story moved you, subscribe to the channel for more powerful, emotional tales that touch the soul. Countless stories of love, loyalty, and unexpected connections await. Like, share, and turn on notifications so you never miss a tale that might change how you see the world.